Blood trickled down Raven Brooks's face as Officer Reynolds writhed on the ground. The crowd's phones captured everything. 3 minutes ago, Raven was just driving home. Now sirens wailed in the distance. Her Navy SEAL training had saved her life. But at what cost? Before we dive into this shocking story, let me know where you're watching from in the comments. Hit that like button and subscribe if you want to see more stories about people standing up against injustice. What would you do if you were in Raven's position? Let's find out how this all started. Raven Brooks stepped out of her modest SUV and inhaled deeply, taking in the familiar yet distant scent of magnolia trees that lined the streets of Pinewood Heights after 12 years of distinguished service as one of the few black female Navy SEALs. She had finally returned to the place she once called home. The decision hadn't been easy. Pinewood Heights held mixed memories for Raven, a predominantly white suburban town where she had always felt like an outsider despite being born and raised there. Grandmother Ellie had raised Raven in a small house on the east side after her parents died in a car accident when she was just 7. Despite the circumstances, Grandmother Ellie had instilled in Raven a fierce determination and unbreakable spirit. "You're going to have to be twice as good to get half as far," she would tell Raven. And Raven had taken those words to heart, graduating top of her class in high school, earning a full scholarship to college, and then stunning everyone by enlisting in the Navy with aspirations to join the SEALs. The military had been Raven's ticket out of a town that seemed to offer limited opportunities for someone who looked like her. Now, at 35, with her grandmother passed away 3 years ago, Raven had used her military savings to purchase a modest 3-bedroom home in Oak Ridge, one of Pinewood Heights' more upscale neighborhoods. The real estate agent had seemed surprised when Raven showed up to view the property, asking twice if she was sure she had the right address. When Raven signed the paperwork, the agent had made a comment about how nice it is to see diversity in the neighborhood, a backhanded compliment that Raven had smiled through with practiced patience. Readjusting to civilian life had proven more challenging than Raven anticipated. The nightmares came almost nightly, vivid flashbacks to combat situations in Afghanistan and covert operations she wasn't permitted to discuss. She'd wake up drenched in sweat, reaching for a weapon that wasn't there. Her therapist at the VA, Dr. Winters, had suggested moving back to familiar surroundings might help ground her. So far, the results were mixed. During her first week back, Raven had been stopped 3 times by different neighbors asking if she was a housekeeper or landscaper. At the local grocery store, she noticed security following her through the aisles. When she jogged in the mornings, she saw people cross to the other side of the street as she approached. Small indignities that built up like layers of sediment, threatening to harden into something more difficult to break through. Raven had started a security consulting business, leveraging her military experience to advise companies on threat assessment and personnel protection. The work was steady, but required travel, which suited her fine. The less time spent navigating the subtle racism of Pinewood Heights, the better, but Raven wasn't completely without allies in town. Mrs. Patterson, an elderly white woman who lived next door, had brought over a welcome basket the day Raven moved in. "I knew your grandmother," she'd said. "Ellie was one of the finest women I ever knew. She'd be so proud of you." The gesture had brought unexpected tears to Raven's eyes. Then there was Jamal, her childhood friend, who now owned the local garage. He'd spotted her at a gas station her second day back and engulfed her in a bear hug that momentarily transported her back to simpler times. "Look at you, Raven Brooks war hero, coming back to grace us with your presence," he'd laughed. Jamal had invited her to dinner that night, catching her up on 12 years of town gossip and introducing her to his wife and twin daughters. It felt good to reconnect with someone who knew her before she was Lieutenant Brooks, before the scars both visible and invisible. It was after one such dinner with Jamal that everything changed. Raven was driving home around 9:30, windows down, enjoying the cool spring air and feeling more optimistic than she had in months. Maybe she could build a real life here after all. Maybe the town had changed in the years she'd been away. She was so lost in thought that she almost missed the flash of police lights in her rearview mirror. Raven felt her body tense instinctively, the way it did before an operation. She took a deep breath, reminding herself that this was just a routine traffic stop. She was a law-abiding citizen, a decorated veteran. She had nothing to worry about. She was wrong. Officer Derek Reynolds adjusted his holster as he approached the black SUV, his right hand resting casually on his weapon. The dashboard computer had pinged when the vehicle passed, registering as registered to a new resident in Oak Ridge. Reynolds had been patrolling this neighborhood for 8 years and prided himself on knowing every resident, every car. This one didn't fit his mental catalog. At 38, Reynolds was something of a legacy in the Pinewood Heights Police Department. His father, Chief Harold Reynolds, had run the department with an iron fist for nearly 3 decades before retiring 5 years ago. The current chief, a college buddy of Harold's, had ensured Derek received preferential treatment, including his choice assignment patrolling the town's wealthiest neighborhoods. What the official record wouldn't show were the 17 complaints of excessive force filed against Officer Reynolds over his 12-year career, particularly when dealing with minority suspects. Each complaint had been dismissed after internal review, the report sealed by police union intervention. Reynolds shone his flashlight directly into the driver's face, momentarily satisfied when she winced at the brightness. "License, registration, and insurance," he barked, not bothering with the customary greeting or explanation for the stop. Raven blinked against the harsh light, but kept her hands visible on the steering wheel, exactly as she'd been taught by older black relatives long before she joined the military. "May I ask why I'm being pulled over, officer?" she asked, her voice calm and respectful. Reynolds scowled. "License, registration, and insurance?" he repeated louder this time. "I'll provide those, sir," Raven said. "My registration is in the glove compartment and my license is in my wallet. I'm going to reach for them now, okay?" Reynolds didn't respond but watched with narrowed eyes as Raven slowly reached for her documentation. She handed everything over, careful to make no sudden movements. As Reynolds examined her license, his expression darkened. "Brooks. You related to Ellie Brooks?" Raven was surprised by the question. "She was my grandmother. She passed a few years ago." Reynolds handed back her documentation with a sneer. "I knew Ellie. She should have taught you how to drive. You were doing 43 in a 40 zone. Raven knew this was false. Her military training had made her meticulous about following rules, including speed limits. Plus, her car had an adaptive cruise control set precisely to the speed limit, but she also knew better than to argue. "I apologize, officer. I'll be more careful." Reynolds wasn't satisfied with her compliance. He shined his flashlight into her car, scanning the interior. "Where you coming from this time of night?" "This is a nice car for someone who just moved here. How'd you afford it?" The implication was clear, and Raven felt a familiar knot form in her stomach. "I'm coming from dinner with a friend. I recently moved back to town after 12 years in the Navy. I purchased the vehicle with my savings." Reynolds laughed, a harsh sound without humor. "Navy? Huh? What were you, a cook janitor?" "I was a SEAL, sir." The moment the words left her mouth, Raven regretted them. She saw Reynolds's face harden, his posture stiffen. Men like him didn't appreciate being reminded that women, especially black women, could achieve what he likely couldn't. "Step out of the vehicle," he ordered, his hand moving back to his holster. "Am I being detained, officer? If so, may I ask on what grounds?" Raven knew her rights, but she also recognized the dangerous territory she was entering. Reynolds leaned closer, his face just inches from her window. "I said step out of the vehicle. Now. I think I smell marijuana." This was a blatant lie, and they both knew it. Raven hadn't touched any substances since before joining the military. She was still subject to random drug testing as a government contractor. Carefully, Raven reached for her phone on the center console. "I'm going to record this interaction for both our protection officer." Reynolds's face flushed with anger. "Put that down. Step out now, or I'll consider you non-compliant." Raven started the recording app, but kept her movements slow and deliberate. Out of the corner of her eye, she noticed lights coming on in nearby houses. A few residents had stepped onto their porches, curious about the commotion. "Dispatch, this is Officer Reynolds." He spoke into his shoulder radio eyes, never leaving Raven. "I need backup at the corner of Oak Ridge and Maple. Got an uncooperative suspect, possible DUI." Raven kept her voice steady, aware that her phone was recording. "Officer, I've provided my documentation and have been cooperative. I haven't been drinking, and I would consent to a breathalyzer test if you have one. I'm simply exercising my right to record this interaction." Reynolds reached suddenly through the window, attempting to grab Raven's phone. She instinctively pulled back, keeping the device out of his reach. "That's it!" Reynolds shouted, yanking at the door handle. "Out of the car now!" He unholstered his taser, pointing it directly at Raven. "I'm giving you 3 seconds to comply, or I will use force 1-2. Raven's mind raced. This situation was escalating dangerously fast. Her SEAL training had prepared her for combat zones, but this was her hometown. She was supposed to be safe here. The irony wasn't lost on her. She'd survived firefights in hostile territory only to face danger from someone sworn to protect and serve. With the taser pointed at her and more neighbors gathering. To watch, Raven made the decision to comply for now while maintaining her recording. She carefully placed her phone in her pocket, making sure it continued to record. "I'm complying, officer," she said, clearly for the benefit of both the recording and the growing number of witnesses. "I'm opening my door slowly and stepping out with my hands visible." Reynolds stepped back, taser still aimed at her chest, a look of anticipation in his face that sent a chill down Raven's spine. She had the distinct impression he was hoping she would give him a reason to use force. As she opened her door, she noticed several neighbors had their phones out, recording the encounter themselves. The situation had attracted attention, and for the first time since the blue lights had appeared in her mirror, Raven felt a small measure of relief. Whatever happened next, at least there would be witnesses. Raven stepped out of her SUV with deliberate slowness, hands raised to shoulder height, palms forward. The evening air felt charged with tension. As Officer Reynolds maintained his aggressive stance, taser still pointed at her chest. The light from nearby street lamps cast harsh shadows across his face, highlighting the twisted sneer that had replaced his professional demeanor. "Turn around! Hands on the vehicle!" Reynolds barked, taking a step closer. Raven complied, turning to face her car, but kept her phone recording in her pocket. "Officer Reynolds," she said, clearly projecting her voice so that the gathering neighbors could hear. "I am Lieutenant Raven Brooks, honorably discharged from the United States Navy SEALs. I'd like to know your badge number and the reason for this detention." The mention of her rank seemed to trigger something in Reynolds. He closed the distance between them in 2 quick strides, violently slapping her phone from her hand. It clattered onto the pavement screen, still illuminated, recording upward at the night sky. "You think your military service means anything here," he hissed, shoving her roughly against the side of the SUV. "This is my town, my jurisdiction." The impact knocked the wind from Raven's lungs, but she maintained her composure, aware that reacting could escalate the situation further. By now, a small crowd had formed on the sidewalk, at least 6 or 7 neighbors, with phones raised, documenting the encounter. Mrs. Patterson had emerged from her house across the street, her elderly frame silhouetted in her doorway, her expression a mixture of shock and outrage. Reynolds noticed the audience and seemed to hesitate momentarily before leaning in close to Raven, his breath hot against her ear. "You people think you can come into our neighborhoods, drive fancy cars, act like you belong," he whispered, voice low enough that only she could hear. "Your grandmother was trash, and so are you. Raven felt a surge of anger, but channeled it into measured words. "I'm requesting your name and badge number, officer. I have the right to that information." Reynolds responded by roughly grabbing her wrist, twisting it behind her back with unnecessary force. "Badge number 643. Not that it'll do you any good, girl." The racial undertone of his final word was unmistakable. "What are the charges?" Raven asked, wincing as he applied more pressure to her wrist. "You're being detained for questioning. Suspicious behavior, possible DUI, resisting an officer." Each charge was more fabricated than the last. Raven knew she was completely sober, had broken no laws, and had complied with every legal command. "I have not resisted in any way, and I'm willing to take a sobriety test," she stated firmly. "Those residents are witnessing and recording this interaction." Reynolds glanced at the growing crowd, his jaw tightening. Without warning, he reached to his belt and unhooked a small canister. Before Raven could react, he discharged a stream of pepper spray directly into her face. The burning was immediate and overwhelming. Raven's eyes felt like they were being scorched from the inside out. Her training kicked in, and she fought the urge to panic, focusing instead on her breathing as tears streamed involuntarily down her face. She maintained her position against the vehicle, still not resisting despite the searing pain. "Stop resisting!" Reynolds shouted, performing for the audience now, despite the fact that Raven clearly wasn't fighting back. "Get on the ground now!" The contradictory commands were a tactic Raven recognized, designed to confuse and create a pretext for escalation when the victim inevitably failed to comply with both simultaneously. Through tear-filled eyes, Raven could see the horrified expressions of the onlookers. Someone in the crowd shouted, "She's not resisting! Leave her alone!" Reynolds ignored them, unclipping his baton with his free hand. Raven sensed, rather than saw, the movement, her SEAL training heightening her awareness, even as the pepper spray clouded her vision. "I am not resisting," she stated clearly, voice steady despite the burning in her throat and eyes. "I am Lieutenant Raven Brooks, and I'm complying with—" The baton connected with her ribs before she could finish, a sharp crack, followed by blooming pain. The force of the blow sent her to one knee, but she caught herself with her free hand, refusing to go down completely. A collective gasp rose from the onlookers, followed by more urgent shouts for Reynolds to stop. Mrs. Patterson's voice cut through the chaos. "I'm calling 911. This is assault." Reynolds seemed beyond reason, now his face contorted with rage. "I'll show you assault," he snarled, releasing Raven's wrist only to draw his service weapon, pointing it directly at her head. Time seemed to slow as Raven, through the blur of tears and pain, saw the barrel of the gun mere inches from her face. In that moment, a clarity came over her, a calculation of odds, angles, and consequences that had been drilled into her through years of specialized training. She had less than a second to decide whether to act or potentially become another statistic, another black body left lifeless on American asphalt. Do you think Raven should defend herself against this clear abuse of power? Comment number 1, if you believe she has every right to protect herself, or comment number 2, if you think she should continue trying to de-escalate the situation peacefully. This is a moment where split-second decisions can change lives forever. Like and subscribe if you want to know what choice Raven made and how it impacted not just her life, but an entire community. What would you do if faced with a weapon pointed at you by someone sworn to protect? How far would you go to defend yourself? The next 3 minutes would change everything for Raven Brooks and Officer Reynolds. 180 seconds can change a life forever. For Raven Brooks, that countdown began the moment Officer Reynolds' finger moved to the trigger of his service weapon. The world around her sharpened into crystal focus, her SEAL training eliminating all distractions. Despite the burning pain from the pepper spray and the throbbing in her ribs where the baton had connected, Raven's mind calculated angles, distances, and potential outcomes with machine-like precision. She registered Reynolds' stance weight forward on his left foot, right arm extended, his balance compromised by anger. She noted the position of bystanders, the distance to cover the exact placement of Reynolds' utility belt. Time seemed to stretch as she made her decision. Raven moved with fluid efficiency, her body operating on muscle memory honed through thousands of training hours. Her left hand shot up, deflecting Reynolds' wrist upward just as his finger tightened on the trigger. The gun discharged harmlessly into the night sky, the crack of the shot echoing off nearby houses. Simultaneously, her right hand clamped onto his forearm, applying precise pressure to the radial nerve. Reynolds' hand spasmed involuntarily, the gun slipping from his grasp. His eyes widened in shock. He'd expected compliance, fear, or at most futile resistance. What he got instead was a textbook disarming maneuver executed with professional precision. Raven maintained her grip on his arm, using his own momentum to guide him into a controlled descent. She applied no more force than necessary enough to neutralize the threat, but not enough to cause serious injury. As Reynolds struggled against her hold, his foot caught on the curb behind him. Raven had anticipated maintaining control through a standard restraint technique, but Reynolds' panicked backward movement altered the physics of the encounter. He pitched backward, breaking free from her calculated grip arms, windmilling as he fought for balance. His heel struck the concrete edge of the curb, sending him sprawling backward. The back of his head connected with the hard surface with a dull thud that made the watching crowd gasp. Raven immediately shifted from defense to first aid. While every instinct told her to put distance between herself and the officer who had just threatened her life, her training overrode that impulse. She knelt beside Reynolds, who lay stunned but conscious, a trickle of blood forming beneath his head. "Officer, down, possible head injury." She called out clearly, reaching for the radio on Reynolds' shoulder. "This is Lieutenant Raven Brooks, Navy SEAL. Officer needs medical assistance at the corner of Oak Ridge and Maple." She then performed a rapid assessment, checking Reynolds' pupil response with the flashlight he had dropped. "Stay still, officer. You've hit your head and may have a concussion. An ambulance is on the way." Reynolds stared up at her with unfocused eyes, confusion replacing the rage that had dominated his features moments before. "What happened?" he mumbled, attempting to sit up. Raven gently but firmly kept him in place. "Don't move. You fell and hit your head. Medical help is coming." Around them, the crowd of neighbors had grown. Their phones captured every moment Raven's professional response, her calm administration of first aid to the man who had just assaulted her. Several witnesses moved closer, their expressions a mixture of awe and respect, as they watched Raven check Reynolds' vital signs and place her jacket under his head to stabilize his neck. The wail of sirens grew louder as the first backup unit sped around the corner, lights flashing. Officer Wilson, a rookie with just 2 years on the force, leapt from his patrol car, weapon drawn. His gaze darted from Reynolds on the ground to Raven kneeling beside him, and his training took over. "Hands up! Get away from him now!" he shouted, aiming his weapon at Raven. Without argument, Raven raised her hands and slowly rose to her feet, taking 2 measured steps back from Reynolds. "Officer Wilson!" called a voice from the crowd. Mrs. Patterson had pushed her way to the front, her normally gentle demeanor replaced by indignation. This woman was assaulted by Officer Reynolds without provocation. We all witnessed it. She's helping him after he attacked her. Wilson's eyes flicked nervously between Mrs. Patterson, a respected member of the community, and the crowd of witnesses, many still recording. "Ma'am, please step back. This is a police matter." "It's a police brutality matter," shouted someone else in the crowd. "We all saw it. She was just driving home." The ambulance rounded the corner, its lights casting alternating red and white pulses across the tense scene. 2 paramedics jumped out, rushing to Reynolds with their equipment. "Suspected concussion, possible neck injury," Raven reported calmly as they approached. "He lost consciousness briefly, but is responsive now, pupils equal and reactive. The paramedics gave her a curious look, surprised by her medical knowledge and composure. "She attacked a police officer," Wilson shouted over the commotion, his weapon still trained on Raven. "Turn around, hands behind your back." Again, Raven complied without protest, turning slowly and placing her hands behind her back. "Officer Wilson, badge number 817, she said clearly for the benefit of the recording devices still pointed in her direction. "I am Lieutenant Raven Brooks, honorably discharged, Navy SEAL. I acted in self-defense after Officer Reynolds pepper-sprayed me without cause, struck me with his baton, and drew his weapon on me during a routine traffic stop. These citizens witnessed the entire encounter." Wilson hesitated, looking around at the crowd, many of whom were nodding in confirmation of Raven's account. Nevertheless, he proceeded to handcuff her, though his movements betrayed his uncertainty. As the paramedics loaded Reynolds onto a stretcher, Mrs. Patterson stepped forward, her small frame somehow imposing as she addressed Officer Wilson. "Young man, I want your name and badge number as well. I'm calling my son Michael right now. He's an attorney with Patterson, Gonzalez, and Chen. This woman is my neighbor, and I witnessed everything. Officer Reynolds should be the one in handcuffs, not her." Wilson swallowed hard but maintained his professional demeanor. "Ma'am, I understand your concern, but I have to follow protocol. We'll sort this out at the station." As Wilson guided Raven toward his patrol car, she caught a final glimpse of Officer Reynolds being loaded into the ambulance, an oxygen mask covering his face, eyes now closed. The same man who just 3 minutes earlier had held her life in his hands. The same man who had underestimated her based on prejudice and paid the price for his misjudgment. The same man who, despite everything she had immediately tried to help once the threat was neutralized. In those 3 critical minutes, the balance of power had shifted dramatically. As the patrol car door closed behind her, Raven knew her life had just changed forever. What she couldn't yet know was how those 3 minutes would ripple outward, affecting not just her future, but the future of Pinewood Heights itself. The fluorescent lights of the Pinewood Heights police station hummed overhead as Raven sat handcuffed to the metal table in interview room 2. Her ribs ached where Reynolds's baton had struck, and her eyes still burned from the pepper spray, though an unsympathetic desk sergeant had eventually allowed her to rinse them with cold water. The clock on the wall read 11:27 p.m., nearly 2 hours since the traffic stop that had turned her life upside down. Through the two-way mirror, Raven could sense eyes watching her, evaluating her calm demeanor, perhaps waiting for her to break down or lash out. They would be waiting a long time. SEAL training had prepared her for interrogations far more intense than this. The door opened and a black woman in her mid-40s entered her police captain's uniform, pressed to perfection, her expression unreadable as she placed a folder on the table and took a seat opposite Raven. "Lieutenant Brooks," she said, her voice carrying the subtle inflection of the South despite her professional tone. "I'm Captain Diane Foster. I've reviewed the preliminary reports of tonight's incident." Raven met her gaze evenly, but said nothing. She'd been in enough interrogations to know when silence was the best strategy. Captain Foster seemed to appreciate this restraint. She opened the folder, scanning its contents, before looking back up at Raven. "You've been charged with assaulting a police officer, resisting arrest, and reckless endangerment. Serious charges." Raven remained silent, her expression neutral. Foster leaned back in her chair, studying Raven with increasing curiosity. "The arresting officer's report states that you attacked Officer Reynolds without provocation during a routine traffic stop, resulting in his hospitalization." At this, Raven finally spoke, her voice steady. "I would like to speak with an attorney before making any statements." Foster nodded, seemingly unsurprised. "That's your right. Though I should inform you that several inconsistencies in the initial report have already come to my attention." She tapped her fingers thoughtfully on the folder. For instance, Officer Reynolds claims you were combative from the beginning, yet the dashboard camera from his patrol car shows you with your hands on the steering wheel, speaking calmly. This revelation caused a flicker of hope in Raven's chest, though her expression remained unchanged. Foster continued, "Furthermore, we've been contacted by no fewer than 8 residents of Oak Ridge who witnessed the latter part of the encounter. They paint quite a different picture than Officer Reynolds' report." Before Raven could respond, the door opened again. A tall man in an immaculately tailored suit entered his presence, immediately filling the room. "Captain Foster," he said, extending his hand. "Michael Patterson representing Lieutenant Brooks. I'd like a moment alone with my client, please." Foster stood, gathering her folder. "Of course, Counselor. For the record, Lieutenant Brooks has not made any statements regarding the incident." As Foster exited, Michael Patterson turned to Raven, his expression softening. "My mother called me. Said a war hero was being railroaded by the PHPD." He shook his head, pulling out a chair. "She didn't mention it was Ellie Brooks' granddaughter. I remember you from high school. You were 2 years behind me, right?" "Track team." Raven nodded, a small smile breaking through her professional facade. "You were the debate champion. Your mother always said you'd be a lawyer." Patterson grinned. "And here we are." His expression turned serious again. "Raven, I need to know exactly what happened tonight. Don't leave anything out." For the next 20 minutes, Raven recounted the events in precise detail: the initial stop, Reynolds' escalating aggression, the pepper spray, the baton strike, and finally, the moment he drew his weapon. When she described her defensive action and Reynolds' subsequent fall, Patterson nodded, taking meticulous notes. "This is textbook self-defense," he concluded. "But before we go any further, you need medical attention. Your ribs could be broken, and pepper spray exposure should be properly documented." He stood, moving to the door. "I'm going to demand they take you to the hospital right now, or I'll have a civil rights lawsuit on the chief's desk by morning." While Patterson advocated for Raven, events outside the interrogation room were developing at remarkable speed. Within an hour of the incident, video from 3 different neighbors had been uploaded to social media. The footage showed Reynolds pepper spraying Raven without provocation, striking her with his baton and drawing his weapon on her while she was clearly not resisting. By midnight, the videos had been viewed over 50,000 times. Local news stations had picked up the story, running breaking news banners: "Navy SEAL detained after confrontation with local police." The Pinewood Heights Police Department's social media accounts were flooded with comments demanding answers. Captain Foster sat in her office, rubbing her temples as she watched the footage for the 4th time. 6 months into her position as the department's first black female captain, she'd inherited a legacy of problems, including complaints about Officer Reynolds that had been consistently buried by the previous administration. Her phone rang, displaying the chief's number. "Foster?" she answered, "Dulcard." "I've got the police union rep in my office," Chief Taylor said without preamble. "He's demanding we charge Brooks with attempted murder and release a statement supporting Reynolds." Foster's grip tightened on the phone. "Sir, with respect, that would be a mistake. The video evidence clearly shows Reynolds as the aggressor. Brooks acted in self-defense." "The union doesn't see it that way." Taylor replied, his tone cautious. "Reynolds is one of their golden boys. His father still has considerable influence." Foster stood pacing the small confines of her office. "Chief, if we charge her, this department will face a public relations nightmare, not to mention a lawsuit we cannot win. Lieutenant Brooks is a decorated war hero who was assaulted by an officer with a history of complaints regarding excessive force, particularly against minorities." Silence hung on the line for several long seconds. "What do you suggest?" Taylor finally asked. "Release Brooks immediately. Drop all charges. Place Reynolds on administrative leave, pending investigation. Issue a statement acknowledging the seriousness of the incident and promising a thorough review." More silence. "The union won't like it. The union doesn't have to answer to the public, sir. We do." After ending the call, Foster stared at her computer screen where a notification indicated that Reynolds' body camera footage from the incident had been uploaded to the evidence server. She clicked to access it only to receive an error message, "File corrupted or unavailable." Her suspicion immediately aroused. Foster picked up her phone again, this time dialing the department's IT specialist. Meanwhile, in the hospital, Officer Reynolds regained consciousness immediately, demanding his phone. The nurse hesitated, explaining that he had suffered a concussion and needed to rest. Reynolds became agitated, insisting until she relented, bringing him his personal belongings. As soon as she left, Reynolds made a call. "Dad," he said, his voice low, "I need help. That Navy SEAL bitch attacked me. She needs to go down for this." The raspy voice of former Chief Harold Reynolds replied, "Already on it, son. The union's raising hell, and I've called in some favors." That body cam footage is being taken care of as we speak. Back at the station, Michael Patterson emerged from the interview room, finding Captain Foster waiting in the hallway. "My client needs medical attention," he stated firmly. "She's been assaulted, pepper-sprayed, and possibly has broken ribs." Foster nodded. "I was just coming to inform you that all charges against Lieutenant Brooks are being dropped pending further investigation. She's free to go. I'll have an officer drive you both to the hospital." Patterson's eyebrows rose in surprise. That was unexpectedly reasonable. Foster offered a tired smile. "Don't mistake efficiency for generosity, counselor. This case is a powder keg, and I'm trying to prevent an explosion." As they spoke, Foster's phone buzzed with a text from the IT specialist. "Body cam footage definitely tampered with. Server logs showed deletion attempt from terminal in Chief's office. Recovering backup now." Foster's expression remained neutral as she slipped the phone back into her pocket. "I'll be in touch regarding the department's next steps," she told Patterson. "In the meantime, please let Lieutenant Brooks know that I personally apologize for her treatment tonight." As Raven was finally released from handcuffs and escorted from the station, camera flashes greeted her outside. Somehow the local press had gotten wind of the story. A reporter thrust a microphone toward her. "Lieutenant Brooks, can you tell us what happened tonight?" Patterson stepped forward, shielding Raven. "My client has been wrongfully detained and physically assaulted by Officer Derek Reynolds of the Pinewood Heights Police Department. She will be making no statements until she receives proper medical care. What happened tonight is a clear case of police brutality, and we intend to pursue all legal remedies." As they drove away, Raven caught a glimpse of the growing crowd outside the police station. Signs were already appearing, "Justice for Raven," and "Fire Reynolds now." She closed her eyes, overwhelmed by how quickly events had escalated. She had returned to Pinewood Heights seeking peace after years of combat. Instead, she had found herself at the center of a different kind of war, one fought not with weapons, but with evidence, public opinion, and the slow grinding gears of a system that too often protected its own at the expense of justice. The sun rose over Pinewood Heights the next morning, illuminating a town transformed overnight by social media and 24-hour news cycles. Raven stood at her living room window, sipping tea with her uninjured arm, the other held close to her body, to minimize the pain from her cracked rib. The hospital had discharged her at 3 a.m. after X-rays, documentation of her injuries, and a prescription for pain medication she had no intention of taking. Her front yard had become an impromptu media campground, with news vans from as far away as Atlanta parked along the street. Reporters stood with microphones doing live stand-ups for morning broadcasts. We're outside the home of Lieutenant Raven Brooks, the decorated Navy SEAL, at the center of a police brutality case that has ignited national controversy. Her phone had been ringing non-stop since 6 a.m. Michael Patterson had advised her to avoid all interviews, for now letting the evidence speak for itself while they prepared potential legal action. The footage of her encounter with Reynolds had been viewed over 2 million times overnight, spawning hashtags and heated debates across every platform. As Raven watched from behind her curtains, she noticed Mrs. Patterson approaching her front door, deftly navigating through the media scrum with surprising agility for a woman of 76. Raven unlocked the door before she could knock. "Mrs. Patterson, you shouldn't have to fight through that crowd," Raven said, ushering her elderly neighbor inside. "Those vultures wouldn't dare stop me," Mrs. Patterson replied with a dismissive wave. "I brought you my special cornbread and some of my healing tea. Michael told me about your rib, said you refused the pain medication." She clicked her tongue disapprovingly as she set down her basket on Raven's kitchen counter. "Reminds me of your grandmother, stubborn as an old mule." The comparison brought a genuine smile to Raven's face for the first time since the incident. "Thank you. For the food and for last night. If you hadn't been there—" Mrs. Patterson waved away her gratitude. "This town has swept too many things under the rug for too long. Harold Reynolds and his son have been terrorizing black folks in Pinewood Heights for decades. It's about time someone stood up to them." Their conversation was interrupted by Raven's phone. The caller ID showed Jamal's garage. "Jamal, hey," she answered. His usually jovial voice was tight with tension. "Raven, you need to know. They vandalized my garage last night, spray-painted 'Race Traitor' across the front, broke out the windows." Raven's grip tightened on her phone. "Are you and your family okay?" "We're fine, staying with my brother-in-law for now. But Raven, this town is splitting apart over what happened. There's already a Back the Blue rally planned for this afternoon at the town square. Reynolds' father is speaking." After hanging up, Raven turned on her television to find every local channel covering the story. On Channel 4, Reynolds' father, the former police chief, stood on the steps of Town Hall, his face ruddy with indignation as he addressed a crowd of supporters. "My son is a decorated officer who was simply doing his job when he was viciously attacked by this woman. The media is painting her as some kind of hero because of her military background. But I ask you, what kind of hero attacks a police officer?" The camera panned to show dozens of people holding signs reading "Blue Lives Matter" and "Support Officer Reynolds." Changing channels, Raven found a different scene unfolding at the Greater Hope Baptist Church, where Pastor Williams, a prominent black community leader, was addressing a diverse group of residents. "What happened to Lieutenant Brooks could have happened to any of us. For too long, certain officers have operated with impunity in our community. Today we say enough is enough." The congregation responded with passionate amens and applause. Raven switched off the television, feeling a weight descend upon her shoulders. She had never wanted to be a symbol or a cause. She had just wanted to come home to heal, to build a quiet life. Now her name was being chanted in the streets by people she'd never met, while others vilified her as an enemy of law enforcement. A notification on her phone alerted her to a new development. Her military record had been leaked to the press. CNN was running a segment detailing her distinguished service, her multiple commendations, the classified operations that had earned her a Purple Heart and a Bronze Star. They had somehow obtained a photo of her in full combat gear, standing with her SEAL team in an undisclosed location. The headline beneath read, "American Hero, or Threat to Police the Raven Brooks Story." The doorbell rang, and Raven approached cautiously, peering through the peephole to see a man in his 50s wearing army dress blues, his chest adorned with medals. She opened the door immediately, recognizing Colonel James Thompson, her former commanding officer. "Lieutenant," he said formally before breaking into a warm smile. "Thought you might need some reinforcements." Raven stepped aside to let him in, genuinely surprised. "Colonel, what are you doing here?" "Saw the news. Caught the first flight out of Virginia." He surveyed her living room with a tactical eye. "You've got yourself quite a situation here." For the next hour, Colonel Thompson briefed Raven as if they were preparing for a mission. He had already spoken to several media outlets vouching for her character and training. He had contacted friends at the Pentagon who were monitoring the situation. Most importantly, he had reached out to other veterans in the area who were organizing a support rally for that evening. "This isn't just about you, Brooks," he explained. "This is about what happens when those sworn to protect abuse their power. You think you're the first vet Reynolds has targeted." Raven looked up sharply. "What do you mean?" Thompson pulled out his tablet, showing her a series of police reports. "Did some digging. Reynolds has pulled over 6 veterans of color in the past year alone. 3 resulted in arrests, all with excessive force complaints that went nowhere. 1 was a Marine who spent 2 nights in the hospital." The information sent Raven's mind racing. Was there a pattern here, beyond general racism? Why would Reynolds specifically target veterans? Before she could pursue this line of thinking, her phone rang again. This time, it was Michael Patterson. "Raven, I've got news. Captain Foster just called. They've recovered Reynolds' body camera footage that someone tried to delete. It shows everything, including him using racial slurs and admitting he pulled you over because, quote, 'these people don't belong in Oak Ridge.'" Patterson's voice had the excited edge of an attorney who knew he had a winning case. "Foster wants to meet with us tomorrow. I think the department is looking to settle before this gets any bigger." After ending the call, Raven stepped back to her window, pulling the curtain aside slightly. The scene outside had grown more chaotic. On one side of the street, a group of protesters had gathered with signs supporting Reynolds and the police department. On the other, a larger group chanted her name and called for justice. Between them stood a line of police officers maintaining an uneasy peace. As she watched, a black teenager carrying a "Justice for Raven" sign was aggressively confronted by an older white man in a "Back the Blue" cap. The officers moved to separate them, but Raven noticed how one officer roughly pushed the teenager while barely touching the older man. The disparity in treatment was subtle but unmistakable, a microcosm of the very problem at the heart of the controversy. Closing the curtain, Raven turned to Colonel Thompson and Mrs. Patterson, who were discussing strategy at her kitchen table. "I can't hide in here while the town tears itself apart," she said decisively. "This isn't just about me anymore." Mrs. Patterson looked concerned. "Raven, honey, you're injured, and there are a lot of angry people out there." Colonel Thompson studied Raven's determined expression, recognizing it from missions past. "What's your play, Lieutenant?" Raven straightened her shoulders, ignoring the pain in her ribs. "We need to shift the narrative. This isn't about one bad officer or one incident. There's something bigger happening here, and I'm going to find out what it is." As she spoke, her doorbell rang again. This time it was Jamal, his expression grim. "They've arrested 2 kids from the neighborhood for the vandalism at my garage. Both black, both innocent. They were at my brother-in-law's with us all night. Reynolds' father was at the station when they were brought in." The information cemented Raven's resolve. What had begun as a routine traffic stop had uncovered something rotten at the core of Pinewood Heights, a corruption that had festered for years while the town looked away. Now that she had become its latest target, Raven wouldn't rest until the truth was exposed. What do you think is really happening in Pinewood Heights? Comment number 1 if you think this is just about Officer Reynolds' individual racism, or comment number 2 if you believe there's a deeper conspiracy involving the entire police department. Like and subscribe if you want to know the shocking truth Raven is about to uncover. Have you ever witnessed or experienced racial profiling firsthand? How would you respond if you were in Raven's position right now? The answers may surprise you as we discover what's really behind Officer Reynolds' attack and why veterans of color seem to be his preferred targets. Rain pattered against the windows of Michael Patterson's downtown law office as Raven studied the documents spread across the large conference table. 3 days had passed since her encounter with Officer Reynolds, and what had begun as a single incident was rapidly expanding into something far more sinister. Patterson entered the room, carrying 2 cups of coffee, sliding one toward Raven. "Just got off the phone with our anonymous source inside the department," he said, his voice low despite them being alone. "They're sending over another batch of files this afternoon. Apparently, Reynolds has a specific folder on his personal drive labeled Special Cases." Raven nodded, her attention focused on a police report detailing the arrest of Marcus Johnson, a Black Army veteran who had been pulled over by Reynolds 6 months earlier. Johnson had ended up with a broken arm and charges of resisting arrest that were later dropped due to insufficient evidence. The pattern was becoming undeniable. 7 cases in the past year, Raven murmured, gesturing to the stack of reports. All veterans of color, all pulled over, in Oak Ridge or nearby neighborhoods, all subjected to excessive force. Patterson took a seat across from her, loosening his tie. "And those are just the ones we know about. Our source suggests there could be dozens more going back years." A soft knock at the door interrupted them. Patterson's assistant entered with a flash drive. "This just came by courier." The envelope said, "Urgent," for Patterson only. Once they were alone again, Patterson inserted the drive into his laptop. "Let's see what our friend at the department sent us." The drive contained a folder labeled simply Our Files. Inside were dozens of documents, personnel records, and surveillance reports, all focused on Black veterans who had moved to Pinewood Heights over the past decade. Raven's own name appeared in a recent file, with notes dating back to when she first purchased her home. "They've been monitoring me since I moved back," she said, the realization sending a chill through her. But why? What possible threat could Black veterans pose to Reynolds or the department? Patterson opened another document. This one a scanned copy of an old newspaper article from 30 years ago. The headline read, "Local Man Dies in Police Custody, Officer Cleared." The article detailed the arrest of James Brooks for marijuana possession, his subsequent death in a holding cell, and the quick exoneration of the arresting officer, Harold Reynolds, Officer Derek Reynolds' father. "Brooks," Patterson said, looking up at Raven. "Any relation?" Raven stared at the grainy photo accompanying the article, showing a young Black man being led into the police station. Though the image was poor quality, there was something familiar in the set of his jaw, the shape of his eyes. "My father," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "He died when I was 3. Grandmother Ellie always said it was a heart condition." She paused, memories shifting and realigning. She never talked about him much, always changed the subject when I asked. Patterson's expression softened with understanding. The department covered it up. Harold Reynolds was just a patrol officer then, but his brother was the coroner at the time. He pointed to another name in the article, medical examiner. Dr. Thomas Reynolds ruled the death natural causes due to an undiagnosed heart condition. Raven sat back, feeling as if the air had been knocked from her lungs. "My entire life I never knew. My father didn't die of natural causes. He was killed by Reynolds's father, and they covered it up." The pieces were beginning to fit together, forming a picture darker than either of them had imagined. "This isn't just about racism," Raven said slowly. "This is personal. The Reynolds family has been targeting Black families in this town for generations, especially anyone who might threaten their power or expose their corruption." Patterson nodded grimly. "And veterans pose a particular threat, disciplined, trained, respected in the community. People might believe a veteran's word over a police officer's." They spent the next hours digging deeper, uncovering a pattern of abuse spanning decades. The Reynolds family, Harold as police officer and later chief, his brother as medical examiner, and now Derek. Continuing the legacy, had maintained a stranglehold on Pinewood Heights through intimidation, corruption, and violence. By targeting veterans of color, they eliminated potential community leaders who might challenge their authority. A text message interrupted their research. It was from Captain Foster. "Need to meet, not at station. Safety concerns. The diner on 5th, 20 minutes. Patterson and Raven exchanged worried glances. "What do you think was, Patterson asked. "So, Raven considered for a moment. Foster's been straight with us so far, and if she's worried about safety, something big is happening. The diner was nearly empty when they arrived, just a few truckers at the counter, and Captain Foster in a back booth dressed in civilian clothes, a baseball cap pulled low over her eyes. She nodded as they slid into the seats across from her. "Thanks for coming," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I don't have much time. The department has eyes everywhere." She slid a USB drive across the table. "This contains the complete body camera footage from Reynolds' encounter with you. The version they're planning to release to the public has been edited to remove his racial slurs and the moment he admits to targeting you specifically." Raven pocketed the drive. "Why are you helping us?" Foster's eyes darted to the window before returning to Raven. "Because I joined the force to make a difference. Because I've spent 6 months watching the Reynolds dynasty destroy lives while the town looks the other way. And because they murdered my cousin 20 years ago and called it a suicide." The revelation hung in the air between them. Foster continued, "There's something else you should know. I accessed the police server this morning and found surveillance logs. They've been watching specific houses in Oak Ridge, all belonging to black residents. There's a team assigned to monitor your house right now operating off the books." Patterson leaned forward. "We can take this to the FBI. This is civil rights violation territory." Foster nodded. "Already made contact with an agent I trust. But there's more to this than even I suspected." She pulled out her phone, showing them a series of photos taken inside what appeared to be an evidence room. "These were sent to me anonymously yesterday. It's a hidden room in the basement of the station, accessible only through the chief's office. Inside are boxes of evidence from dozens of cases involving minorities who died in custody or after encounters with Pinewood Heights officers." Raven studied the images, her tactical mind noting details. "These boxes are labeled by year. They go back 4 decades. Foster nodded grimly. "The Reynolds family has been systematically targeting minorities in this town since Harold joined the force in the 1980s. Anyone who threatened to expose them either left town or had tragic accidents." She checked her watch nervously. "I need to go. I told them I was taking a personal hour for a doctor's appointment. Use the evidence. My source inside will continue sending information, but be careful. These people are dangerous and desperate." After Foster left, Raven and Patterson sat in stunned silence, the weight of what they'd discovered settling heavily upon them. "We need to find the other victims," Raven finally said. "Anyone who survived an encounter with the Reynolds family might have pieces of this puzzle we're missing." Patterson nodded in agreement. "I can start reaching out to some of these names from the reports. If we can build a class action case, show a pattern over decades." His words were interrupted by his phone ringing. The caller ID showed his office number. "Patterson." He answered, then listened intently, his expression growing increasingly alarmed. "When are you sure lock the doors and don't let anyone in? I'm calling the police now, not PHPD, the county sheriff." He ended the call, turning to Raven with grave concern. "Someone broke into my office. My assistant came back from lunch and found the place ransacked. All our files on your case are gone." Raven's mind shifted into tactical assessment mode. "They're getting desperate. We need to secure what evidence we still have and get it to the FBI immediately." As they paid for their untouched coffees and prepared to leave, Raven's phone buzzed with a news alert. The headline made her blood run cold. "Officer Reynolds awakes from coma claims, PTSD, from combat-triggered Navy SEALs attack." The accompanying story quoted medical experts claiming Reynolds had suffered traumatic brain injury and memory loss, potentially compromising any case against him. It also cited sources close to the investigation who suggested Raven had a history of violent episodes related to her military service. "They're rewriting the narrative," Patterson said, reading over her shoulder, "painting you as an unstable veteran and Reynolds as the victim." Raven's jaw tightened. Reynolds was never in a coma. He was conscious when I left the scene. This is a complete fabrication. Patterson steered her toward the exit. Welcome to the Reynolds playbook. They've been manipulating the truth in this town for generations. As they stepped outside, Raven noticed a police cruiser parked across the street, its occupant watching them intently through dark sunglasses. She recognized Officer Wilson, the rookie who had arrested her the night of the incident. When he saw her looking, he started the engine and slowly pulled away. "We're being followed," she said quietly to Patterson. "We need to assume all our communications are compromised." Patterson nodded, his lawyer's confidence momentarily shaken by the realization of what they were up against. "What's our next move?" he asked. Raven watched the police cruiser disappear around a corner, her military training kicking in as she formulated a strategy. "We go on the offensive," she said, her voice steady with resolve. The Reynolds family has operated in the shadows for decades, using fear and intimidation to silence their victims. It's time to bring everything into the light. The Pinewood Heights Community Center buzzed with tension as residents filled every available seat, with dozens more standing along the walls and spilling out into the hallway. The emergency town hall meeting, called by Mayor Wilson to address recent concerns regarding police conduct, had drawn the largest crowd in the building's history. Raven sat in the front row beside Michael Patterson, acutely aware of the division in the room. To her right sat supporters, Mrs. Patterson Jamal and his family, Pastor Williams, and his congregation veterans groups and community activists. To her left, a sea of blue off-duty police officers, their families and supporters, wearing Back the Blue t-shirts and Reynolds family campaign buttons from when Harold ran for county commissioner. At precisely 7 p.m., Mayor Wilson approached the podium, his usual confident demeanor replaced by nervous glances between the two factions. "Good evening, everyone. I've called this meeting to address the incident involving Officer Derek Reynolds and Lieutenant Raven Brooks, and to discuss steps forward for our community." Before he could continue, the side doors burst open. District Attorney Eleanor Martinez strode in, flanked by two suited individuals whom Raven immediately recognized as federal agents from their posture and alert eyes. The room fell silent as Martinez approached the podium, whispering something to the mayor, who stepped aside with visible relief. "Citizens of Pinewood Heights," Martinez began, her voice firm and authoritative, "I'm here to announce several important developments in the ongoing investigation into police practices in our community." She paused, scanning the room. As of 4 p.m. today, all charges against Lieutenant Raven Brooks have been permanently dropped. Furthermore, Officer Derek Reynolds has been charged with assault battery, civil rights violations, falsifying police reports, and obstruction of justice. Gasps and murmurs rippled through the audience. From the police section, angry shouts erupted. Harold Reynolds, still imposing despite his 70 years, stood up. "This is a witch hunt. My son is a hero who was attacked while doing his job." Martinez waited for the commotion to subside before continuing. "Additionally, the Department of Justice has opened a formal investigation into the Pinewood Heights Police Department, focusing on a pattern of civil rights violations spanning several decades." At this announcement, the room exploded into chaos. Officers stormed out in protest, while community members cheered. Through the din, Raven noticed Captain Foster slip quietly into the back of the room, her expression unreadable as she observed the scene. Mayor Wilson desperately called for order, pounding his gavel uselessly as the meeting devolved into shouting matches between opposing sides. Raven caught Patterson's eye, and he nodded almost imperceptibly. It was time. She stood, making her way to the podium. Her military bearing and calm presence commanded attention, gradually quieting the room. "My name is Lieutenant Raven Brooks," she began, her voice steady and clear. "I returned to Pinewood Heights after 12 years of military service, hoping to find peace in my hometown. Instead, I found that the community I remembered had been living under a shadow of fear and intimidation for generations. She looked directly at Harold Reynolds as she continued. What happened to me was not an isolated incident. It was part of a systematic targeting of black citizens, particularly veterans, by certain members of the police force. The silence in the room was absolute now, every eye fixed on Raven. 3 days ago, I discovered that my father, James Brooks, did not die of natural causes, as I had been told my entire life. He died in police custody after being arrested by then-Officer Harold Reynolds for a minor offense. His death was ruled natural by the medical examiner, Harold's brother, Thomas Reynolds. Harold Reynolds's face contorted with rage. "That's a damned lie. You can't prove any of this." Raven remained composed. "Actually, we can." She nodded to Patterson, who opened his briefcase and distributed folders to the mayor-council members and media representatives present. These documents include internal police communications, suppressed autopsy reports, and testimony from former officers who were pressured to remain silent. They detail decades of abuse targeting minority residents of Pinewood Heights, all orchestrated or covered up by members of the Reynolds family. As officials began reviewing the evidence, murmurs of shock spread through the room. Raven continued. For years, the Reynolds family has maintained power in this town through fear. They've targeted anyone they saw as a threat, particularly black veterans who might have the community standing and credibility to challenge them. My father, Marcus Johnson, Darius Washington, Elijah Carter, and dozens more. From the back of the room, a voice called out, "My brother was one of them." Then another. "They did the same to my son." Suddenly, people throughout the audience were standing sharing stories of harassment, false arrests, and unexplained deaths that had been dismissed or covered up. The collective grief and anger was palpable, years of suppressed trauma finally finding voice. Harold Reynolds, seeing the tide turning against him, pushed his way toward the exit. "This is nothing but lies from criminals and troublemakers. My family has protected this town for 50 years. As he reached the door, he found his path blocked by 2 county sheriff's deputies. Behind them stood Captain Foster. "Harold Reynolds," she said, her voice carrying across the now silent room. "You are under arrest for tampering with evidence, conspiracy, and accessory after the fact in the death of James Brooks." As the former police chief was led away in handcuffs, shouting threats and profanities, District Attorney Martinez retook the podium. "I want to assure everyone that this investigation will be thorough and transparent. Every case involving the Reynolds family will be reviewed. Every victim will have a chance to be heard. Justice has been delayed in Pinewood Heights, but it will no longer be denied." The meeting continued late into the night as residents shared their experiences and officials outlined plans for police reform, community oversight, and reconciliation efforts. Throughout it all, Raven sat quietly listening to the stories that mirrored her own. This was no longer just about her encounter with Derek Reynolds. It had become something much larger, a community finally confronting its painful history and demanding change. As the meeting finally adjourned near midnight, Raven stepped outside to find a small crowd waiting. Some were media hoping for statements or interviews. Others were community members wanting to express support or share their stories. But what caught Raven's attention was a police cruiser parked directly across from the community center entrance. Behind the wheel sat Officer Wilson, the rookie who had arrested her. As their eyes met, he stepped out of the vehicle and approached her. The crowd tensed, but Raven held up a hand, signaling them to stay calm. "Lieutenant Brooks," Wilson said, stopping a respectful distance away. "I wanted to apologize for my role in what happened to you. I believed I was following protocol, but I should have questioned what I was seeing." The sincerity in his voice surprised her. "I joined the force to help people, and," he continued, "a lot of us did. We're not all like Reynolds." Raven studied him for a moment before nodding. "Then help us build something better, Officer Wilson. This town deserves a police force that protects everyone equally." As Wilson returned to his cruiser, Raven's phone buzzed with a text from Michael Patterson. "Just heard from my source. Derek Reynolds spotted at your house an hour ago. County sheriff en route, but no sign of him yet." A cold dread settled in Raven's stomach. Reynolds was out on bail pending his trial, having been released to his father's custody before Harold's own arrest. With his father now in custody and his career in ruins, Derek Reynolds had nothing left to lose, and he knew exactly who to blame for his downfall. Raven slipped away from the crowd, declining interview requests as she headed for her car. As she drove toward home, her military training kicked in, assessing threats, planning contingencies, remaining calm under pressure. She had faced danger many times during her service, but there was something uniquely unsettling about returning to find an enemy waiting in what should be her sanctuary. The streets of Pinewood Heights were quiet as she approached her neighborhood, the houses dark except for porch lights offering small pools of illumination against the night. As she turned onto her street, she saw the sheriff's department vehicles parked near her house lights, flashing silently. Deputies were conducting a perimeter search with flashlights, but their body language told her they had found nothing. Reynolds had either never been there or had fled before they arrived. Raven parked behind the patrol cars and approached the senior deputy, identifying herself. "No sign of him inside or around the property, ma'am," he reported. "We've secured the house and will keep a unit posted overnight." Raven thanked him and, after answering a few questions, made her way to her front door. The deputies had been thorough and professional, but as she entered her home, a prickle of awareness ran down her spine, the sixth sense that had kept her alive in combat zones. Something was different. Nothing visibly disturbed or out of place, but the air felt charged, as if the house itself was holding its breath. Slowly, methodically, she moved through the rooms, checking closets behind doors, under beds, all the places an intruder might hide. Everything seemed secure until she reached her bedroom and noticed the window slightly ajar. She was certain she had closed and locked it before leaving. The realization came too late. As she turned toward the door, a shadow detached itself from behind her dresser. Derek Reynolds, his face contorted with rage, a service pistol aimed directly at her heart. "You ruined everything," Reynolds snarled, his voice barely above a whisper. His uniform was disheveled, his eyes bloodshot and wild. The hand holding the gun trembled slightly, but at this distance he couldn't miss. Raven remained perfectly still, her trained mind rapidly assessing the situation. The deputies outside were too far to hear normal conversation. Reynolds had clearly slipped in before they arrived and hidden, waiting for her return. The gun was his service weapon, and his finger was already on the trigger. "It didn't have to come to this, Derek," she said calmly, using his first name deliberately to humanize herself to him. "There's still a way out that doesn't end with you in prison for life." Reynolds gave a bitter laugh. "Prison? I'm not going to prison. Once I take care of you, I'm leaving the country. Dad has connections, money stashed away. We planned for something like this." He gestured with the gun for her to move away from the door. "You think you're so special with your SEAL training and your war stories. You're nothing. Just another troublemaker who doesn't know her place." As he spoke, Raven noticed something unexpected in his eyes beneath the anger, fear, and something else: vulnerability. "Is that what your father taught you?" she asked quietly. "That people like me don't belong, that we need to be kept in our place?" Reynolds's jaw tightened. "Don't talk about my father. You don't know anything about him. I know he arrested my father for possessing a small amount of marijuana. I know my father died in custody under suspicious circumstances. I know your uncle falsified the autopsy report." Each fact landed like a physical blow, making Reynolds flinch despite himself. "Necessary actions," he muttered. "This town would fall apart without people like us maintaining order." Raven took a calculated risk. "Was beating your wife also necessary, Derek? Is that the kind of order your father taught you to maintain?" The question struck home. Reynolds' face paled, the gun wavering slightly. "How did you—" "We found the sealed domestic violence reports when we were investigating your father. 3 incidents all buried by the department. Your ex-wife moved to Atlanta to escape, but she's willing to testify now." This was a calculated bluff based on fragments of information Patterson had uncovered, but Reynolds's reaction confirmed it was accurate. "She was going to ruin my career," he said, his voice suddenly defensive. Dad explained that sometimes you have to be firm with women just like you have to be firm with criminals. It's all about maintaining respect. The twisted justification revealed volumes about Reynolds's upbringing. Raven saw an opening not for physical escape, but for psychological leverage. "Your father taught you that violence was power," she said, her voice softening with genuine compassion. "He taught you that hurting others was the way to feel strong. But look where that's led you, Derek. Your career is over. Your father is in jail. You're standing in a stranger's bedroom with a gun about to throw away whatever future you might still have." She took a small step toward him, hands still visible. "My father never got the chance to teach me anything. Your father took that from me. But my grandmother taught me that hate destroys the vessel that carries it before it reaches its target." For a moment, uncertainty flickered across Reynolds's face. The gun lowered fractionally. Then his expression hardened again. "Save your therapy talk. It's too late for that. You've destroyed my family's legacy, and you're going to pay for that." Raven decided to play her final card. "I know about Thomas," she said quietly. Reynolds froze, the color draining from his face. "What did you say?" "Your older brother Thomas, named after your uncle. He was 16 when he committed suicide. The official report called it an accident, but Captain Foster found your father's suppressed statement that Thomas had been depressed for months after being caught with another boy." The gun in Reynolds's hand was shaking visibly now. "Shut up," he whispered. "You don't know anything about Tommy. I know your father believed that toughness could cure him. I know he sent Thomas to a conversion program the summer before he died. I know from your mother's sealed testimony during their divorce that your father blamed himself but expressed it through anger and control." Tears welled in Reynolds's eyes, his composure cracking. "Dad said we couldn't talk about it. Said Tommy was weak, that he'd brought shame on our family. After that, Dad got stricter with me. Said he wouldn't lose another son to weakness." In that moment, Raven saw past the corrupt officer to the damaged child beneath a boy who had lost his brother and then been molded by a father whose own pain had twisted into cruelty. It didn't excuse Reynolds's actions, but it helped explain the cycle of violence that had spanned generations. "Derek, she said gently, "you can break the cycle. Right now. Your father couldn't face his failures, so he created enemies to blame instead. You don't have to follow that path." Reynolds blinked rapidly, the gun lowering further. "It's too late," he said, but the conviction had drained from his voice. "I've done too much. There's no coming back from this." "There's always a way back," Raven said, taking another careful step forward. "It starts with putting down the gun and accepting responsibility, not for your father's actions, but for your own." For several tense seconds, Reynolds stood frozen in indecision, the weapon trembling in his grasp. Then from outside came the sound of a car door slamming, followed by a deputy's radio crackling. The noise seemed to snap Reynolds back to reality. His expression hardened, the gun raising once more. "No," he said, his voice cold again. "This ends now." Before he could pull the trigger, the bedroom door burst open. Captain Foster stood in the doorway, her service weapon trained on Reynolds. "Drop it, Derek, now." Reynolds spun toward the new threat, his gun swinging toward Foster. In that split second of distraction, Raven moved. With the lightning reflexes that had made her an elite SEAL, she closed the distance between them, deflecting Reynolds's arm upward as the gun discharged into the ceiling. She locked his wrist in a joint manipulation hold, applying precise pressure until his fingers released the weapon. It clattered to the floor as Reynolds dropped to his knees, all fight suddenly gone from him. "It's over, son." Foster said, holstering her weapon and producing handcuffs. "Your father has already confessed to evidence tampering and conspiracy in exchange for a reduced sentence. He gave you up, Derek. He's saving himself." As Foster secured the handcuffs around Reynolds's wrists, he looked up at Raven, the anger in his eyes replaced by empty defeat. "I never had a chance, did I?" he asked quietly. "With him as a father, I was always going to end up here." Raven knelt to meet his gaze. "We all have choices, Derek. Your father made his. You made yours. Now you have another choice. Face the consequences with honor, or continue denying responsibility." Foster led Reynolds away as deputies flooded the house, securing the scene and collecting evidence. Raven stood alone in her bedroom, adrenaline slowly ebbing, leaving her exhausted but resolute. The confrontation had ended without bloodshed, but the deeper wounds in Pinewood Heights would take much longer to heal. 6 months later, Raven stood before a different crowd in the same community center. The room was packed, but this time there was no division, no tension, only shared purpose. On a table beside her sat architectural plans for the new Pinewood Heights Community Relations Center, to be built on land donated by the city after the old police station was condemned following discovery of structural issues. "This center will house our new Civilian Oversight Board conflict resolution services, youth mentorship programs, and training facilities," Raven explained to the attentive audience. "It represents our community's commitment to transparency, accountability, and reconciliation." Much had changed in half a year. Derek Reynolds had pleaded guilty to all charges, receiving a 10-year sentence with possibility of parole after 7. His testimony against his father and other corrupt officers had been crucial in the Department of Justice investigation, which had resulted in 11 arrests and a complete restructuring of the police department. Captain Foster, now Chief Foster, sat in the front row, nodding as Raven outlined the police reform measures already implemented: body cameras with automatic upload to secure servers, community-oriented policing initiatives, and mandatory de-escalation training for all officers. The training program had been Raven's creation, drawing on her military experience to teach officers how to resolve potentially violent situations without force. 3 classes of officers had already completed the program with documented reductions in use of force incidents. After the presentation, as community members mingled and discussed volunteer opportunities for the new center officer, Wilson approached Raven. Now a sergeant following Foster's restructuring of the department, he had become one of the strongest advocates for reform within the force. "Lieutenant Brooks," he greeted her with a respectful nod. "We had an incident yesterday I thought you should know about." Raven tensed slightly, old habits dying hard. "What happened?" Wilson smiled. "One of our rookies pulled over a black man driving through Oak Ridge. New resident, former Marine." The officer followed all the new protocols, remained respectful, explained the reason for the stop, kept his hands visible. When he learned the driver was a veteran, he thanked him for his service and gave him just a warning for the broken tail light. He paused. The driver asked for the officer's name so he could commend him to his supervisor, said it was the most positive interaction he'd ever had with police. Raven felt a weight lift from her shoulders. Change was happening slowly but surely. "That officer was one of yours, wasn't he, from the training program?" Wilson nodded, pride evident in his expression. "First-class graduate. He said your lessons about treating every citizen with dignity really stuck with him." As Wilson moved away to speak with Chief Foster, Raven felt a hand on her arm. She turned to find Mrs. Patterson, now the chairwoman of the Civilian Oversight Board, despite her 76 years. "Your grandmother would be so proud of you," the elderly woman said, eyes bright with emotion. "Ellie always said you were destined for great things, but I don't think even she could have imagined how you would transform this town." Raven embraced her throat tight with emotion. "I wish she could have seen it." "She does see it," Mrs. Patterson said firmly, "through all the lives you're changing." Later that evening, Raven drove home through the streets of Pinewood Heights, noticing how different the town felt now. neighbors of all races gathered on porches and in yards, children played together in parks that had once been informally segregated by invisible but understood boundaries. There was still work to be done, wounds to heal, trusts to rebuild. But the foundations had been laid for a community where justice wasn't just an ideal, but a lived reality. As she pulled into her driveway, Raven noticed a patrol car passing slowly by, not surveilling, but protecting. The officer inside raised a hand in greeting, and Raven returned the gesture, a simple acknowledgement of the new relationship between citizens and police that was taking root in Pinewood Heights. Inside her home, Raven paused before a newly hung photograph, her father in his high school graduation gown, smiling with the unbridled hope of youth. Beside it hung her Navy SEAL team photo, and next to that, a framed article about the opening of the new community center. Past, present, and future in visual harmony. She had come home seeking peace and instead found purpose. The confrontation with Reynolds had been just the beginning of a journey toward justice that had revealed painful truths, but also created space for genuine healing. What do you think about how Raven handled this situation from beginning to end? Could her approach to confronting systemic racism while working to create meaningful change serve as a model for other communities? Comment below with your thoughts. If you found this story powerful, please like, subscribe, and share it with others who might be inspired by Raven's courage and commitment to justice. Thank you for joining me on this journey through one woman's fight against discrimination and her community's path toward reconciliation. What other stories of courage in the face of injustice would you like to hear? Let me know in the comments. Raven Brooks's journey reveals powerful truths about confronting injustice. First, systemic racism often runs deeper than individual incidents, with corrupt practices potentially spanning generations. Second, lasting change requires more than exposing wrongdoing. It demands rebuilding institutions with transparency and accountability at their core. Third, true reconciliation cannot ignore painful histories, but must acknowledge them as part of the healing process. The story also demonstrates how individuals with moral courage can catalyze community transformation when they refuse to accept the status quo. Raven's military training gave her the skills to defend herself physically, but her true strength came from her commitment to justice for everyone, not just herself. Most importantly, the narrative shows that breaking cycles of hatred requires understanding their origins without excusing the behavior they produce. By seeing Reynolds as both perpetrator and victim of a toxic legacy, Raven found a path toward justice that addressed not just symptoms, but root causes. Finally, the story reminds us that real change is possible, but demands sustained effort from both individuals and institutions working together toward a shared vision of equality. What systems of injustice exist in your community that need challenging? Have you ever witnessed discrimination and found the courage to speak up? Raven's story shows how one person's stand against racism can spark widespread change. Share your thoughts in the comments about how we can all be catalysts for justice in our own communities. If this story moved you or made you think differently about confronting systemic racism, please hit that like button and subscribe for more powerful narratives about everyday heroes fighting discrimination. Share this video with someone who needs inspiration to stand up against injustice in their own life. Thank you for joining this important conversation about racial justice and community healing. Remember, true change begins when brave individuals refuse to accept the world as it is and work together to create the world as it should be.